Morning, guys. Okay, so we are on dodecahedron circle number 9 for chapters 17 and 18. Can't believe we're getting through that so quickly. But it's going to be asking us about character traits today. So we're talking about the flesh lump eater, which is one of our major giants, and the BFG. So we're talking about traits. Traits are basically how do they act? What do they do? What makes them them? All right. So it's going to be asking us, based on the description in the book, draw a picture of the flesh lump eater, so our creepy big giant, and the BFG. Next, we're going to write 4 traits that describe the characters. So what do they look like? What do they do? How do they act? Are they kind? Are they mean? Are they loud? Are they quiet? Are they big? Are they small? Those kind of things. Okay, so we're going to be describing what it is that makes them them. All right. We also need to, of course, read our chapters 17 and 18 today. We're going to start on chapter 17, page 133, Journey to London. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight as the big friendly giant went galloping across it. Sophie, still wearing only her nightie, was reclining comfortably in a crevice of the BFG's right ear. She was actually in the outer rim of the ear, near the top, where the edge of the far ear folds over. And this fold-over bit made a sort of roof for her and gave her wonderful protection against the rushing wind. What is more, she was lying on skin that was soft and warm and almost velvety. Nobody, she told herself, had ever traveled in greater comfort. Kind of funny how he tilts his ear up, huh? Sophie peeped over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of giant country go whizzing by. They were certainly moving fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though there were rockets in his toes. And each stride he took lifted him about 100 feet into the air. But he had not yet gone into that whistling top gear of his, when the ground became blurred by speed, and the wind howled, and his feet didn't seem to be touching anything but air. That would come later. Sophie had not slept for a long time. She was very tired. She was also warm and comfortable. She dozed off. She didn't know how long she slept, but when she woke up again and looked out over the edge of the ear, the landscape had changed completely. They were in a green country now, with mountains and forests. It was still dark, but the moon was shining as bright as ever. Suddenly, and without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharply to the left. For the first time during the entire journey, he spoke a few words. "Look quick over there," he said, pointing his long trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the murky darkness, all she saw at first was a great cloud of dust, about 300 yards away. "Those other giants are all galloping back home after their guzzle," the BFG said. Then Sophie saw them. In the light of the moon, she saw all 9 of those monstrous, half-naked brutes thundering across the landscape together. They were galloping in a pack, their necks craned forward, their arms bent at the elbows, and worst of all, their stomachs bulging. The strides they took were incredible. Their speed was unbelievable. Their feet pounded and thundered on the ground and left a great sheet of dust behind them. But in 10 seconds, they were gone. "A lot of little girlies and boysies is no longer sleeping in their beds tonight," the BFG said. Sophie felt quite ill. But this grim encounter made her more than ever determined to go through with her mission. It must have been about an hour or so later that the BFG began to slow his pace. "We is in England now," he said suddenly. Dark though it was, Sophie could see that they were in a country of green fields, with neat hedges in between the fields. There were hills of trees all over them, and occasionally there were roads with lights of cars moving along. Each time they came to a road, the BFG was over it in a way with no motorist could possibly have seen anything except a quite black shadow flashing overhead. At once, a curious orange-colored glow appeared in the night sky ahead of them. "We is coming close to London," the BFG said. He slowed to a trot. He began looking about cautiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides, but there were still no lights in their windows. It was too early for anyone to be getting up yet. "Someone bound to see us," Sophie said. "Never is they seeing me," the BFG said confidently. "You is forgetting that I is doing this sort of thing for years and years and years. No human being is ever catching even the smallest wink of me. I did, Sophie whispered. Ah, he said, yes, but you were the very first. During the next half hour, things moved so swiftly and so silently that Sophie, crouching in the giant's ear, was unable to understand exactly what was going on. They were in streets. They were in houses everywhere. Sometimes there were shops. There were bright lamps in the streets. There were quite a few people about, and there were cars with lights on. But nobody ever noticed the BFG. It was impossible to understand quite how he did it. There was a kind of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt into the shadows. Would glide, that was the only word to describe his way of moving. He would glide noiselessly from one dark place to another, always moving, always gliding forward through the streets of London, his black cloak blending with the shadows of the night. It is quite possible that one or two late-night wanderers might have thought they saw a tall black shadow skimming swiftly down a murky side street. But even if they had, they would never have believed their own eyes. They would have dismissed it as an illusion and blamed themselves for seeing things that weren't there. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There was a road running through it and a lake. There were no people in this place, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they had set out from his cave many hours before. What's the matter? Sophie whispered in her under-the-breath voice. I is in a bit of a puddle, he said. You're doing marvelously, Sophie whispered. No, I isn't, he said. I is now completely boggled. I is lost. But why? Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures. Don't be silly, Sophie whispered. This is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where we are. You is joking. I am not. I swear I'm not. We're almost there. You mean as nearly at the Queen's Palace? Cried the BFG. It's just across the road, Sophie whispered. This is where I take over. Which way? The BFG asked. Okay, so they've made it to London. They're now at Hyde Park, which actually really is across the street from the palace. We'll have to see what they do. She says, straight ahead. The BFG trotted forward to the deepest park. Now stop. The BFG stopped. You see that huge roundabout ahead of us just outside of the park? Sophie whispered. I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner. Even now when it is still an hour before dawn, there's quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park Corner. Then Sophie whispered, in the middle of the roundabout there's an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse and a rider atop of it. Can you see it? The BFG peered through the streets. I is seeing it, he said. Do you think that if you took a very fast run at it, you could jump clear over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch, and over the horse and rider, and land on the pavement on the other side? Easy, BFG said. You're sure? You're absolutely sure. I promise, BFG said. Whatever you do, you mustn't land in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. Don't get so flustered, BFG said. To me, that is a little snitchy little jump. There's not a thing-a-ling to do. Then go, Sophie whispered. The BFG broke into a full gallop. He went scorching across the park, and just before he reached the railing that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew high over Hyde Park Corner and landed as soft as a cat on the pavement on the other side. Well done, Sophie whispered. Now quick, over that wall. Directly in front of them, bordering the pavement, there was a brick wall with fearsome-looking spikes all along the top of it. A swift crouch, a little leap, and the BFG was over it. We're there, Sophie whispered excitedly. We're in the Queen's back garden. Ooh, things are starting to heat up. We'll have to see what happens. Chapter 18, The Palace. By gumdrops, whispered the big friendly giant. Is this really it? There's the palace, Sophie whispered back. Not more than 100 yards away, through the tall tree in the garden, across the mown lawns and the tidy flower beds, the massive shape of the palace itself loomed through the darkness. It was made of whitish stone. The sheer size of it staggered BFG. But this place is having 100 bedrooms at least, he said. Easily, I should think, Sophie whispered. Then I is boggled, BFG said. How's I possibly finding the one where the Queen is sleeping? Let's go a bit closer and have a look, Sophie whispered. The BFG glided forward among the trees. Suddenly he stopped dead. The great ear in which Sophie was sitting began to swivel around. Hey, Sophie whispered. You're going to tip me out. Shh, BFG whispered back. I is hearing something. He stopped behind a clump of bushes. He waited. The ear was still swinging this way and that. Sophie had to hang on tight to the side of it to save herself from tumbling out. The BFG pointed through a gap in the bushes, and there, not more than 50 yards away, she saw a man padding softly across the lawn. He had a guard dog with him on a leash. The BFG stayed as still as stone. So did Sophie. The man and the dog walked on and disappeared into the darkness. He was telling me they has no soldiers in the back garden, the BFG whispered. He wasn't a soldier, Sophie whispered. He was some sort of watchman. We'll have to be careful. I is not too worried, the BFG said. These waxy big ears of mine is picking up even the noise of a man breathing the other side of this garden. How much longer before it begins to get light? Sophie whispered. Very short, the BFG said. We must go pell-mell for leather now. He glided forward through the vast garden, and once again Sophie noticed how he seemed to melt into the shadows wherever he went. His feet made no sound at all, even when he was walking on gravel. Suddenly, they were right up close against the back wall of the great palace. BFG's head was level with the upper windows 1 flight up, and Sophie, sitting in his ear, had the same view. In all the windows on that floor, the curtains seemed to be drawn. There were no lights showing anywhere. In the distance, they could hear the muted sound of traffic going round Hyde Park Corner. The BFG stopped and put his other ear, the one Sophie wasn't sitting in, close to the window. No, he whispered. What are you listening for? Sophie whispered back. For breathing, the BFG whispered. I was able to tell if it's a man, human being, or a lady by the breathing. We has a man in there. Snorted a little bit too. He glided on, flattening his tall, thin, black-cloaked body against the sides of the building. He came to the next window. He listened. No, he whispered. He moved on. This room is empty, he whispered. He listened in at several more windows, but at each one he shook his head and moved on. When he came to the window in the very center of the palace, he listened, but did not move on. Ho, ho, he whispered. We has a lady sleeping in there. Sophie felt a little quiver go running down her spine. But who? She whispered back. The BFG put a finger to his lips for silence. He reached up through the open window and parted the curtains ever so slightly. The orange glow from the night sky over London crept into the room and cast a glimmer of light onto its walls. It was a large room, a lovely room, a rich carpet, gilded chairs, a dressing table, a bed, and on the pillow of bed lay the head of a sleeping woman. Sophie suddenly found herself looking at the face she had seen on stamps and coins in the newspapers all her life. For a few seconds she was speechless. Is that her? The BFG whispered. Yes, Sophie whispered back. BFG wasted no time. First and very carefully, he started to raise the lower half of the large window. The BFG was an expert on windows. He had opened thousands of them over the years to blow his dreams into children's bedrooms. Some windows got stuck. Some were wobbly, some were creaked. He was pleased to find that the Queen's window slid upward like silk. He pushed up the lower half as far as it would go, as to leave a place on the sill for Sophie to sit. Next, he cracked the window curtains. Then his finger and thumb lifted Sophie out of his ear and placed her on the window ledge with her legs dangling just inside the room, but behind the curtains. Now don't you go tip-toppling backwards, the BFG whispered. You must always be holding on tight with both hands to the inside the windowsill. Sophie did it as he said. It was summertime in London, and the night was not cold, but don't forget that Sophie was wearing only her thin nightie. She would have given anything for a dressing gown, not just to keep her warm, but to hide the whiteness of her nightie from watchful eyes in the gardens below. The BFG was taking the glass jar from the pocket of his cloak. He unscrewed the lid. Now very cautiously, he poured the precious dream into the wide end of his trumpet. He steered the trumpet through the curtains, far into the room, aiming it at the place where he knew the bed to be. He took a deep breath, he puffed out his cheeks, and he blew. Now he was withdrawing the trumpet, sliding it out very, very carefully, like a thermometer. Is you all right sitting there? He whispered. Yes, Sophie murmured. She was quite terrified, but determined not to show it. She looked down over her shoulder. The ground seemed miles away. It was nasty drop. How long will the dream take to work? Sophie whispered. Some takes an hour, the BFG whispered back. Some is quicker, some is slower still, but it's sure to find her in the end. Sophie said nothing. I was going off to wait in the garden, the BFG whispered. When you want me, just call out my name, and I is coming very quick. Will you hear me? Sophie whispered. He was forgetting these, the BFG whispered, smiling, and pointing to his great ears. Goodbye, Sophie whispered. Suddenly, unexpectedly, BFG leaned forward and kissed her gently on the cheek. Sophie felt like crying. When she turned to look at him, he was already gone. He had simply melted away into the dark garden. Ooh, so they've blown in the dream. Now they have to wait to see what the queen shall dream. Okay, don't forget adding a picture of the flesh on Peter, the BFG, and the character traits, or how they act and what they do and what they look like for both characters, okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. And until next time, bye guys.